My brother inherited a business that made $5 million a year, and I got $350 a month. And the worst part is, at first, I agreed to it. My father's name was Jake. He created a chain of antique cafes called Forgotten Time. The places looked almost like museums: old cabinets, leather chairs, shelves full of books that were 100 years old, and dozens of antique clocks sticking quietly on the walls. People came for the atmosphere, but the atmosphere was only part of the story. The real money appeared behind closed doors. Collectors brought rare items, sometimes private auctions were held, and occasionally there were quiet bets placed on antique pieces. Not everything that happened there was completely legal, but the profits were enormous. The whole system brought in nearly $5 million a year. When my father died, the entire business passed to my older brother James. There were no long discussions, it just happened. And honestly, no one was very surprised. James had been involved in the business almost his entire life. He was 9 years old when he started helping in the cafes, carrying boxes, cleaning tables, listening to collectors talk. He literally grew up in that world. The rest of us were just kids running around antique markets, never thinking about real work. When it was time to talk about the inheritance, James gathered us in the living room. He looked calm, too calm, like he had already planned everything. He said he had a simple offer. We could all keep living in our houses for free, he would pay the bills, and each of us would receive $350 every month. Then he paused and added one more thing. The business would belong only to him. And that was it. No one argued. My younger brothers already had families, children, loans, and responsibilities. For them, stability was enough. The old family house stayed with me and my mother. And life just moved on. James ran Forgotten Time, and the rest of us lived our lives. At first, I tried to convince myself it was fair. James had worked for it, he took risks, and he built the business with our father. But over time, something inside me started to change. I was always around the business, but never truly part of it. Sometimes James would call and ask for small favors: pick up a box, replace a worker for a shift, receive a delivery. Nothing difficult. I told myself I was helping family, but if I'm honest, it felt more like running errands. One evening, I visited the cafe in the city center, and for the first time, I really watched everything. James walked through the room, checking the registers, talking to customers, observing the staff. Everything worked perfectly. Everyone listened to him. He controlled everything: the money, the documents, the deliveries. But there was something else. Every few weeks, the cafe hosted private evenings, invitation only. Couriers brought rare items, sometimes without full documentation. Auctions happened quietly behind closed doors. Nothing huge, but enough to raise questions. If paperwork needed to move faster, it moved faster. If some rule stood in the way of a deal, the rule disappeared. And somehow the system kept working perfectly. Sometimes things went wrong. Once a customer tried to steal a small antique statue. Another time, a courier arrived 2 hours late with a pocket watch worth $50,000. And once the main safe broke during a private auction. Chaos everywhere. In moments like that, I helped, calming people down, directing staff, trying to keep everything under control. Nothing heroic. But something strange started to bother me. James barely noticed. To him, I was just there. Meanwhile, my brothers almost stopped visiting the cafes. The money arrived every month. That was enough. But inside me, the feeling of injustice kept growing, because this had been our father's business. Our father's, not just James's. And from the outside, it looked like it belonged to only one person. And one day a thought appeared that I couldn't ignore anymore. Maybe I also had a right to a piece of it, or maybe James had simply been smarter than all of us. That question stayed in my head for months until one small thing changed everything. It was just a box. That day, James asked me to move several boxes from the storage room before a private event. Normal work, but one box caught my attention immediately. It was locked, heavy, and had the name of a collector who had once been investigated by the police. Curiosity got the better of me. When no one was around, I opened it. Inside were three antique watches, very expensive ones. I picked up the certificates and immediately noticed the problem. The serial numbers on the watches did not match the numbers in the documents at all. The papers were fake. In that moment, I understood something. Those small, rule breaking moments I had noticed before were not small anymore. If anyone ever started a serious investigation, the entire system could collapse. $5 million a year, hundreds of deals, dozens of collectors, all connected to one name, James, and technically, our entire family. I closed the box and locked it again, but now I knew something important. I had leverage, I could go to a lawyer, show the documents, start an investigation, maybe even force a new inheritance decision, maybe finally get my share. But there was another side to that choice. If an investigation began, the cafes might close, employees would lose their jobs, collectors would disappear, and James could lose everything, maybe even his freedom. That meant my decision could destroy not only his life, but our entire family. A few weeks later, we gathered again for our usual Sunday dinner. Mom served food. My brothers talked about their lives. James sat at the head of the table, calm as always. At one moment, our eyes met, and for a second, it felt like he knew something. That night, I returned to my father's old house. I sat in his chair by the window. In my hand was a copy of the certificate, proof that could destroy everything. On the wall was an old photo of all of us at an antique market, before the money, before the business, before the secrets. And in that moment, I realized something. This decision was no longer just about money or the law. If I expose the truth, I might be right. But if I stay silent, I remain a brother. And to this day, I'm still not sure which choice is harder,